Welcome to Snippets of Wisdom with your host, Dr. Mike Corral and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Snippets of Wisdom is the boomer's gift to the next generation and to the world at large. Dr. Michael J. Murphy and Coach Dr. Mike Corral are experienced psychotherapists, writers, and healers who find the greatest satisfaction in sharing the benefits of a lifetime of struggle and learning. Coach Mike has spent decades spreading deep wisdom and supporting youth through the juvenile justice system. Dr. Michael has directed mental health services at many correctional centers and testified in countless trials as an expert in sex-related issues and mental illness. And he was one of the 500,000 humans at Woodstock. So now, please welcome the hosts of Snippets of Wisdom.
Welcome to Snippets of Wisdom. I'm Dr. Mike Corral, and with me is my co-host, Dr. Michael Murphy. Today we have a very, very interesting topic today, especially for you guys out there. We are going to talk about something that probably has gotten past us without us really knowing it as men. And so be sure to stay with us and be sure to pay attention, because there's probably more that you can do about this, guys, than you realize. So today we're exploring the diffuse crisis of masculinity facing in our society today. And this is looked at not as a single organized failure, but as a fragmented response to economic change, shifting gender roles, rising mental health issues, and a host of other things. Dr. Murphy, tell us a little bit more about what's going on.
It's such a huge issue, and it's great to be with you today to talk about this topic, which really I think is reverberating now throughout our culture in really huge ways. We see it every day in the news, we see it in our advertisements, we see it in the way that all kinds of methods of sharing information are organized. And that is kind of what is the meaning of masculinity, and therefore what is the meaning of femininity. I mean, we've had these identities over the course of many, many, many centuries of time, obviously, and they may have served a purpose in a certain way over the thousands of years that humanity has existed. And yet now it seems like there's a lot of lack of clarity and a lot of conflict even about how the issue of masculinity, or the meaning of masculinity and the meaning of femininity, should relate to each other and complement each other even more. Of course, it's been going on. We all can remember, way back in the days of the beginnings of the women's movement and women's lib and all that, that really kind of set the stage for the differentiation of male and female identities in terms of the old and more traditional male and female senses of purpose. I mean, males had a role that was to protect others, to protect the family. The identity of masculinity was to provide for the safety of others, I mean, fundamentally. And by implication, women generally, in principle, looked for relationships with men who were capable of providing that degree of protection and safety. So the clarity of those identities was firm. And now that's different. So we're into a whole new ballgame, and that's the issue that we're trying to talk about and clarify today.
I have a question about how it looks versus how it is, because given social media, we are exposed to a lot more opinion. And what we're exposed to is not, it's a lot of opinion, but it's the opinion of the vocal people. And it's not necessarily the opinion of the people who are not saying anything. So we're kind of gauging the trends by what we hear from the ones who are saying things and demonstrating things. When we talk about, for example, women wanting the the men to be the providers and the ones who would go out and you know bring home the bacon, so to speak. That does not necessarily speak for all women. It speaks for the women who are complaining and making the most noise about it, but it doesn't speak for women who are satisfied with the flexibility of roles in the home. There are women out there who would rather, bring home the bacon themselves, or at least have some kind of contribution to it. So it's a matter of, I don't know, maybe looking at each situation and making a determination. But what we can focus on is the reason why men are not speaking up to the degree that a lot of women are.
That's a great point. I think that, the old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease,
Yeah.
really means that the squeaky wheel gets the attention. If you talk louder, if you raise your voice, then you tend to get people to pay attention to you. And that goes all the way back to that safety issue again, when people yelled or acted as if they might become violent at some point in the future, then we, as human beings, we tend to focus our attention on them. That's why one of the things that really is of concern to me with regard to the masculine identity and the feminine identity and how we negotiate these things is that so many of our media, particularly movies, and our TV shows, are based on themes of violence, right? So basically, this issue of risk and danger, which usually is typically created uh, by the male identity, then you have the effort on somebody's part to rectify that danger in some way, and that's the theme of just about every movie or TV plot that we can think of. And so I think that issue of just coming up with a new way of relating to each other with regard to the male and female identity is the key. How are we going to change these themes of male as protector and provider and female as nurturer
So
and maintainer of the peace?
my question is, why do we even need to protect that image if we're okay with our own personal image and the role that we choose for ourselves as men or women for that matter? Why do we need to change the trend if we're perfectly comfortable not moving with the masses, not moving in the direction that the masses are moving? If we're doing something different and if it's working for us, uh, why is that not acceptable, or is it acceptable?
Yeah. So part of it is coming to acceptance of this huge change that has occurred with regard to the male and female identity. For example, in my own field of psychology, I'm a psychologist. So my job is to evaluate things and do testimony regarding the reality of issues relating to mental illness. The field used to be dominated by men, and men were the originators of most of the theories of psychology in our community, and that has to do with our kind of global culture now. Were created by men. They were thought of by men and implemented by men. And now all that has changed. Now the significant majority of mental health professionals and psychologists are female. So the dynamic of the whole field has altered with regard to um, sort of the underpinnings and the emotional foundation of what we think about in terms of what is mental health and what is illness and how we engage in caretaking and how we don't engage in caretaking. So it's very, very, very interesting to see that as um, the power dynamics in various fields have changed, and we've become a more egalitarian culture financially and professionally. Most of the faculties of universities now, I believe, are female. The people who are delivering the message and clarifying what things mean, there's a field called epistemology in philosophy, and basically that is the field that says what is true, like what constitutes as knowledge. And so the people who are making those decisions now largely are females. That happens in the university. That happens in the institutions that are the foundation and provide the foundation for what we consider to be truth. And now, more and more likely, that's a function that is completed by females. And males are sort of withdrawing. I mean, do males want to compete with females in that domain and sort of stand and get into conflicts with females with regard to what is qualifying as truth?
Yeah, that's a whole controversial issue. What qualifies as truth, at on a larger scale. However, what is true for me and what works for me, I'm just using it as an example. As an individual, can continue to work for me regardless of what the general population regards as truth or not. So rather than get involved with uh, the fact that more women are in charge of what is recognized as true and not, uh, it's going to be up to men as individuals first, and then collectively second, because if men don't care enough about this, then there's no sense in trying to push them to speak up and and do something about it. But when it hits their awareness, that's the only time it becomes an issue. So in other words, if they're not impacted by it in a personal way, it's not gonna spark any changes collectively in other things.
Really, if you keep your head down, sort of that's the thing. If you keep your head down and avoid conflict,
Yeah.
then you can sort of not be involved in these situations where
And
the
it's a
temperature gets raised and things become more risky.
Yes, and that represents a passive platform, passive um, posture, because if you look at what happens when you decide to make noise about it and all of this conflict becomes blown up, you're probably more likely to not succeed, less likely to succeed. Whereas if you use what people might identify as a passive aggressive approach and just wait till things settle and then make your point when people are not um, expecting it and preparing themselves to argue, they're more likely to have to deal with that awareness that you were able to make when everything was silent. So in other words, there's a strategy to being vocal. If we decide to do it when everybody else is talking, there's less likelihood that we will be heard. When we decide to do it strategically, when everyone else is quiet, and then not just do it vocally, not just um, and not warn necessarily people of what we're doing, but proceed with our actions and in a demonstrative way towards what we want and what we believe is necessary, the impact is going to be a lot greater than if we try
Yeah,
and speak.
that's a great point, and it's sort of the question emerges: who is making the rules? And we're going to come back in 1 minute, but that's the central issue, like who is going to make the rules? And historically, of course, it has been men who have been in the roles largely of being in the power position to determine what the rules are, what the laws are, what's right, what's wrong, what will be punished, what will not be punished. So though those are issues that we're called upon now, and men are in the position of either choosing to be passive or more assertive with regard to those very interests. So we'll look forward to talking more about that in detail when we come back. And thank you all for being here. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps these channels, and share. Uh, and we look forward to talking to you further and getting more deeply into those issues when we come back.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back. Big question here. Is it a strategy to be passive about what's going on in social media and in the political domain today? I mean, things happen in waves, and sometimes, not sometimes, we always have to make a decision whether we're going to ride each wave that comes along. If we decide that we're not going to try to ride the wave all at the same time and we're going to wait one out, it doesn't mean we don't intend to emerge again. Is it a strategy to be passive, Dr. Murphy, sometimes and not say what you mean? You know, I have something. I'd like to hear an answer to that question because I have something that I want to propose and I think is of real importance on that issue. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about the situation I can remember when I was young, growing up in largely immigrant communities that existed when I was young. Uh, for example, the local movie theater might play a certain movie, and maybe the movie had certain elements in it that could be interpreted as objectionable with regard to maybe showing too much skin or something like that. And the local bishop would create a list. He would create a list of movies that and it was always a he, of course, because it's a bishop, and it was kind of the Catholic power structure, would say that X movie was not, literally, wouldn't be an X-rated movie. It would be something quite mild by contemporary standards, but he would put a list in the paper that would say that these movies were not expected to be looked at or observed by
They would be
the
condemned.
population of the parish. So suddenly those movies would disappear. So what I'm saying is that people took stands in those days. I mean, they took stands about what was right, what was accessible, what was going to be accessible, and what was healthy for the population. Somebody was driving the bus, in other words, morally speaking, rather than it just sort of driving itself, as it is these days, where kind of anything goes and people make their choices. So the absence of an external authority is what I think you're talking about. I mean, you're talking about the fact that the role of men in clarifying moral values and safe and healthy behavior has largely been abdicated. And so what are the effects of that abdication? And I think we can see a lot of those effects potentially. As a psychologist whose responsibility is to evaluate people with regard to their well-being or their safety on thousands and thousands of occasions, that is the core of the issue. I mean, what is acceptable, what is safe, what is right, what is wrong. And we have tended to just be very careful with regard to believing that we have the right to make those statements. I mean, some groups are much more willing to make them, and we won't mention their name now, but we're having situations now in the world where uh, spiritual or philosophical organizations that have a certain willingness to clearly say what they will accept and not accept are playing a more prominent role in governmental choices, things like that. So we really are confronting a renegotiation, if you will, or a revival of this need that we were talking about earlier, the need to step forward and speak clearly what you believe in, to be authentic. Working with a lot of clients now, and I'm sure you do too, Dr. Mike, about clients who are hesitant to step forward and speak their truth. I mean, speak your authentic truth. I mean, that's something we can do in life, and that was a masculine task in the past that now, of course, is shared with females too. And how do we negotiate, the nature of those decisions? Choosing to step forward, speak your authentic truth about what you believe is good, what you believe is not so good, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable.
I have a question. You just triggered a question right this minute. Um, what what is the counterpart for misogyny for women? If misogynist are men that despise women, what is the counterpart for women who despise men? Is there one?
It's very interesting that you say that. I mean, I have been what's called a qualified examiner, and that's a person who is responsible for evaluating individuals, always men, with regard to their potential sexual dangerousness. I mean, how they might pose a risk of harm to other people with regard to sexual offending. So that's what a qualified evaluator does. And so that question is really the core thing. What constitutes danger? What constitutes harm? That's what you're investigating, right? That's what you're asking about.
Well, I'm asking because um, in issues of, and this is a little bit off topic, but in issues of rape, it's rarely about lust. It's more about anger, vengeance, and a lot of other issues,
Right.
probably of a misogynistic nature. But what about cases where women seduce men? Of course, they don't have the wherewithal to force themselves in a way that can cause bodily harm, but sexually force themselves in a way that can cause bodily harm. But there is still the intent, the forcefulness, the aggression, and the current part for misogyny with women. And it looks like because there's a lack of those things, those physical elements to do that kind of harm, that another platform is taken by which they can have the same effect, but it's probably more political, more social, more emotional, and maybe even more passive aggressive.
Right. That brings up the concept of what we call in the field, and many have heard of this, sexual sadism. So sexual sadism is the willingness on the part of the aggressor to inflict pain on the other person for the discrete and distinct purpose of causing suffering. So it's not in the process of excitement or anything like that. The purpose of it is to inflict pain on the victim, and that actual inflicting of pain is sexually exciting for the perpetrator. That is the definition of sexual sadism. And that can go either way. I mean, on the female side, a female who inflicts sexual degradation on a male of some part. It
Like
probably
Lorena Bobbitt was a prime example of what a lot of other women wished they could have done, but they didn't have the guts to do it. And whether or not Lorena Bobbitt was somebody that acted out of passion or frustration or whatever, there's probably a good chance that her intentions didn't go as deep um, as some women would have wished, because it was a statement to her husband, whereas other women probably would like to have made a statement to men in general about, the intolerance that they've that is long overdue. They've tolerated so many things a year that now they want to do it. But why do women need a movement to do that? Why can't they speak up individually? And I think that's probably getting closer to the root cause of what we're seeing today.
right. I think that's becoming much more accepted. I mean, you think, certainly the women's movement in a very healthy way is about empowering women to be assertive in the process of expressing their needs and desires and choices, and to enact those choices in the way that it is healthy for them and for others to do, right? So it's about the healthy empowerment of women. That can also go in a pathological direction, as it can for men, when the purpose of being powerful is to inflict suffering or degradation on the other. And that can happen from the female side too. If a woman is distinctly sexually insulting to a male partner and seeking to inflict psychological and emotional pain, probably less physical pain, but certainly psychological or emotional pain, distinctly with regard to the individual's sexual functioning or sexual identity. You're no kind of man, or something like that. To really insult the man's uh, gender specifically. That's a form of psychological sexual sadism, because it is distinctly focused on the purpose of degrading the other with regard to their sexual identity and their very sexual being. So, I think that the question is whether that's going on in some kind of cultural way now. Are we systematically degrading men in some way and disempowering men with regard to their very nature? Are we doing things now uh, with a lot of the rules and laws and thoughts and interpretations that are going on now uh, within our culture, when they display a purpose to disempower men and to render men feeling impotent, or at least undefined with regard to their gender identity as
So
male?
I that brings in another good question: is why is the fact that there aren't any men's movement, there are no men's movements that compare to women's movements per se, and there isn't a unified, constructive, uh, you know, movement going on. How is that a problem? And is it a problem? Is it a problem, and how is it a problem? What what can happen if it continues to be there?
I think it's a huge problem, and I think that it's something that we were addressing for a period of time. I mean, we did have something of the men's movement in the past. You may remember the writer and poet Robert Bly, whose
Yeah,
book Iron John
I
was a
remember.
wonderful book, and we'll talk more about that book when we come back. And I think that book really sought to approach the core of this very issue
That's
about
right.
male woundedness and
Right.
male empowerment and
Yeah.
the male ability to feel better about the very fact of being a man.
We need to resurrect Robert Bly when we come back.
Master of words, powerful player, What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Thank you for being with us. Thank you for coming back. There are major issues with regard to masculinity, the male role, and the male's response to their role nowadays. Are we intimidated as a gender by the way the women's movement has taken off, and by the way they have taken on platforms and have unified in so many ways, or does it just simply mean that we have a different strategy as the male gender? And this is important because we have to realize our role. It's important to understand our purpose as individuals, and then collectively as men in our community, our society, and in the world. So the question is, what are we doing about affirming who we are and deciding upon our role? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to generalize in any way that would exclude anybody who's got a very significant and powerful role that is different in an individual way. All of those things are vastly important because they are what actually form the collective movement. I'd like to know, Dr. Murphy, your opinion on the diverse experiences and interests that men. I know men are not monolithic. Men, priorities that we have, like jobs, custody issues, or mental health, our dependence on systems, our dependence on our spouse, our family, on each other as friends. What are some of these experiences, and how do they impact our life?
That really is just a very, very deep and fundamental question, I think, because men historically have been defined in terms of strength, right? I mean, we've thought about, I mean, if you think about the muscular thing, the Arnold Schwarzeneggers of the world, or what do the ultimate masculine figures, I mean, they have big muscles. They're supposed to be strong, physically strong. And so the what is the purpose of physical strength? Well, one of the purposes of physical strength, maybe its primary one, is the purpose of protection that we were talking about before, that men have the capacity to protect the clan, the group, the family from some kind of physical risk that may exist in the world. So the purpose of a man was to be strong, to have strength, to have the capacity to use physical power to increase the probability of safety for everyone. That's all changing now. Now that whole agenda, now that's all out the window, and that whole role is pretty much gone. And so now, we largely are at least in the process of solving that issue. The male identity does not have to be primarily or mainly organized around the ability to be strong and to protect others through physical force. And I
Yeah.
think, that's a huge shift. Now men need to learn how to relate to others, relate emotionally. I mean, women were seen because they had much more emotional intelligence. And there's different kinds of intelligence. It's very important for our audience to understand that there are very different forms of intelligence in human beings. One is physical intelligence, but another is psychological and emotional intelligence and sensitivity. And women typically,
Can't let go of that. Spiritual intelligence accounts for our ability to use all that we have, and part of that is our intuition. We don't use, we've relegated that job to women as men, saying they're supposed to be the intuitive ones. But we're just as responsible because we do have all of the organs and the framework and all of the glands to do it, physically and
yeah,
spiritually. So the other question is this: now that we've acknowledged that not every man is big and strong, myself included, 5 foot nothing, and I am still having the role which I love, being a protector and a provider, as well as a spiritual guide. So it's actually incumbent upon me as a man, as a father figure, and as a spouse, and and brother to uh, all the men in my life, to bring a balance of spirituality, emotionality, or physicality, and all of these things combined into one. You brought up Robert Bly because he gave excellent examples for men to, and he provided platforms where men could feel comfortable in their role, establishing and proclaiming their role. What are your thoughts on how we should do that as men of diverse natures? Not all of us are big and strong. Not all of us are intelligent. Some of us are more mechanical. Some of us are so many different kinds of men. What are your thoughts on that?
right. There's so many different forms of intelligence and the genders have sort of specialized, if you will, in those areas of intelligence over the years, depending on the circumstances. There's physical intelligence, there's emotional intelligence, there's technological intelligence, there's musical intelligence, there's all these different kinds of intelligence that have tended to be broken down by gender to some extent uh, over the centuries of time that humanities and the thousands of years that humanity has existed and needed to survive. But now that the survival mechanism is not so prominent, it's not only about survival. I mean, you sort of rise up this level of actualization to the point where now men need to become more capable in the area of emotional relatedness and psychological awareness, the ability to talk to others about this, to talk to your spouse, to talk to your partner about how you feel, but more importantly, perhaps just as importantly, to listen, to elicit from your partner, how do you feel? What is life like for you now? I just want to understand you. I want you to help me to understand you. Can you just share your life experience with me at this moment over the course of your lifetime? And can I just listen to you and hear what you have to say and give you the feeling that I understand you? So the receptive intelligence that men need to develop in order to establish a firm foundation for their relationship with their significant other. And that is the secret sauce. The secret sauce in a relationship, whether it's a marriage or any kind of relationship that you have, a work relationship, whatever, is that you can give the other person the feeling that you understand them. And in
Yeah.
order to do that, you have to listen. Obviously, it's not a matter of being expressive. It's a matter of being accurately receptive.
And reflect.
Yes.
That brings us closer towards the stigma around vulnerability. We have to be more vulnerable if we're going to express an understanding and empathy and the compassion as reflective listeners. And, it has to be authentic. We can't just pretend to listen and do all the right expressions as if we're pretending to listen. We have to actually get involved and somehow express some vulnerability at the same time, if for nothing or no other reason, to level the playing field so that they know that we get them, so that they know that we're there with them and we're not just there listening to them.
Right.
It discourages when men are vulnerable and then trampled upon. That vulnerability is trampled upon. It discourages the emotional openness for men. And it kind of I don't know. It takes away the impetus, takes away the motivation to be emotionally open, vulnerable, and compassionate. Which is another side that men need to have. In the past, we've been forced to do those things secretly because it doesn't need, we don't have the capacity, but we've lacked the stage and the opportunity to express it and to show it.
So that point, I think, is just really a great one and a very fundamental one. That is the man's ability and really men's need to unify around the capacity to be vulnerable and to be able to expose themselves and their sense of insecurity or their sense of maybe anxiety or fear, without that necessarily connoting a sense of degradation or loss of status, right? So men had to be powerful, we had to be strong, we had to dominate. No, now you can be those things if you need to be in situations, but it's rare that you actually need that strength, the dominant strength. It does happen, but it's rare. But much more typically is the need to be able to share one's vulnerability and share one's suffering in an honest and open way without feeling like you are being dishonored or demeaned in some way, just by virtue of the fact that you acknowledge your struggles. The ability to express one's struggles uh, in a manner that actually can reveal real psychological strength. And we can talk about that in more detail when we come back. I mean, I had a great psychotherapist many years ago who talked about what's called healthy narcissism. And we'll talk about that when we come back because it's a critical issue, I think, for men going forward and for women to be receptive to. Uh, we'll talk about it in detail when we return.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, healthy narcissism. We don't usually hear those two words in the same sentence. But yeah, when we come back, stay with us.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
Thank you for staying with us. We've got some juicy stuff to talk about, and we're not nearly done. We're not, so we may have to do another series about this. One of the things that we have not discussed is that there are institutions that used to serve men in developing their thoughts collectively as men, civic clubs, religious groups, trade unions, and things like that, and that has weakened over the past. But one thing I want to remind you of, this is a very, very powerful topic, and we need your inspiration. We need for you to like and subscribe to this channel if you feel that it is of some good to you. Please comment as well. I want you to know that you can get a hold of either one of us. Dr. Murphy is a forensic psychologist. He does counseling and does psychological evaluations and things like that. And Dr. Murphy, can you give them the number and your website so they can know exactly how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize what you just said, Dr. Mike, about the importance of these issues. Snippets of Wisdom is kind of a little clip of a name, but it really is these very significant philosophical and psychological issues that are determining the future for ourselves and for our children and grandchildren and for the planet Earth. I mean, it's really critical, and we are deeply passionate about these topics that we're talking about, and we try to give something meaningful to our audience out there. And feel free to reach me. My website is psychologicalinvestigations.com. That's psychologicalinvestigations.com. And on that site, you can have access to all of these webcasts, many of the ones we've done in the past, and you can listen to them and watch them as you see fit. And also, you can have access to a lot of the identifying information for us. My phone number, my email, should you want to contact me to make an appointment or to discuss issues or to schedule appearances or anything like that. So I certainly urge you to like and subscribe again and help us to really get the focus of society more on these issues that we're struggling to clarify and resolve and bring into open discussion for all of us, because we're really trying to save the world, if you don't want to be too grandiose. But we're trying to do something that will help our society to move forward. And I think these platforms, podcasts, webcasts, the media now can be harmful, but it also can have its positive gifts as well. And we're looking, the two of us, to be able to support those goals as however we can.
Right. Thank you very much. I don't know how much time we got left, but please like and subscribe to our channel. You can reach also reach.
Yeah, we have a bunch of time left. So yeah. So I was just wanting to bring up the issue of the healthy narcissism again. if you
Okay.
wanted to spend a minute on that one. What are your
Hang on
thoughts?
a second. We have about 2 minutes left and the show's over. So just you can get in touch with me as well. Thriving with Coach Mike. On Wednesday nights, you can reach me there and get all of my information if you need a personal session. There's tons more that we want to discuss, and then unfortunately we've gone through just about all of them today. There are consequences to the ideas that we've been talking about today, the fragmentation of the men's role and the lack of a unified stance and movement among men. And we'll be sure to bring up another session of this because there's a lot more to discuss. We'd like to be able to do that with your comments on mine and in response to any emails that you want to send to us. So please feel free to do that. Let's talk a little bit for how much time we have left. I think we have probably 2 minutes left.
Well, mine is saying 7 minutes, so we'll see.
And that's been there for about 5 minutes, right? But anyway, we have 3 minutes left. Let's talk about healthy narcissism for 3 minutes, Dr. Murphy. Go for it.
Sure. So we think about the term narcissism as being a negative one. He's a narcissist. She's a narcissist. So really, it's important to understand there is no such diagnosis as a narcissist. I mean, it is something all of us have the capacity to see other people's perspective more or less robustly or clearly. That is how much we can understand other people's points of view. That is a cognitive skill that some of us have a lot of and some of us have a little. It's on a spectrum like everything else. So, but clearly within that, there is what's called healthy narcissism. So healthy narcissism is the ability for us to sustain our sense of psychological and emotional integration through periods of stress or duress or challenge. Like if we're in a situation where we feel like it's really difficult, we're being challenged, we're being demeaned, or we're in a hot situation in some way, our ability to maintain our calmness and our sense of psychological and emotional status and value through that stress is healthy narcissism. That's a good sense of self. And we all want that. We all want to be strong enough to be able to hold ourselves together through hard times. And that's what's called healthy narcissism. And it's very important. So this is the goal of personal self-work. I mean, when you get in psychotherapy, you do meditation, you do positive visualization, all those are forms of reinforcing a strong and secure sense of self that will allow you to remain integration and continue your advancement toward your goals, the positive goals and loving goals that you have over the course of your lifetime. So thank you so much for listening to us today, and we look forward to seeing more of you next time. And feel free to like and subscribe and send messages and such. And thank you so much, Dr. Mike, for your sharing with me today.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. I appreciate your input. It's very powerful stuff. We'll be back next week. So thanks for being with us. Bye-bye.
This has been Snippets of Wisdom with hosts Dr. Mike Corral and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Tune in and learn about the primary issues facing our society today and find the best chance of securing a stable and prosperous future. Snippets of Wisdom will enrich your life and the lives of all of your loved ones.